Nice to see you all here. And our Sangha online. It is possible to live a life where we have no ill feeling toward anyone or toward anything or toward any event. It is possible to have a life where you have no ill feelings, no malice, no immediate aversion. We have teaching, sometimes it's just the word thus. And the way I like to think of it is, if we can cultivate a sense of being able to just be with things in the very immediate moment, things are. Something is. Things as they are. Things as they is. This is sometimes put that way. Just to see clearly with nothing added, no value added in the first instance, just for the first instance, just to be with things as they are. Sometimes called thusness or suchness, itness, isness. We can imagine how much space we would have if none of our time was taken up with having a sense of a kind of habitual aversion or habitual judgment toward things. And this is not about how we act in the world necessarily, because at a certain point we might take action. We might decide that what is happening is harmful. We might want to take some action to mitigate the harm that's being done. But we can do that with no malice. We can do that with no ill feeling toward anyone. And in the first instance, we just see it as it is, just see it clearly as it is. Whatever is happening, just as it is. It can just be very ordinary things like today. There's been a lot of a meeting next door that's been kind of loud. There's a way we can just be, oh yeah, there's a meeting next door that's kind of loud. And that's it. Don't have to do anything more about it. Unless there was something to do, like maybe if the door was open, the thing to do would be to shut the door. But in the first instance, it'd just be, oh, there's a loud meeting going on next door. Because when we can just have this kind of neutral seeing of things as they are, it's actually not even neutral, it's more intimate than neutral. It's more actually feeling identified with and connected with what's happening. We can actually, it's more heartfelt than that, than neutral. If we can have that leaning into whoever or whatever is happening with a sense of intimacy first, then we see it more clearly, we don't distort it, and then we can actually act much more skillfully. This is a koan that I like. I don't think this is really the central point of the koan, but it's one of the things I like about it. This is in the Blue Cliff record, case 92. It's only a short koan, but I'll just set the scene. So sometimes we say the world-honoured one for Sakyamuni Buddha, for the historical Buddha. So he would get up, he would come to give a talk, and he would get up on the seat, and the assembly would be there, and there'd be an assistant next to him. And after he gave the talk, the assistant would strike the gavel to announce that the talk was ended, and would say, "Clearly behold the Dharma of the King of Dharma. The Dharma of the King of Dharma is thus." And then the Buddha would get up and leave. So here's the koan. The world-honoured one ascends the seat. One day, the world-honoured one ascended his seat. Manjushri struck the gavel and said, "Clearly behold the Dharma of the King of Dharma. The Dharma of the King of Dharma is thus." The world-honoured one then got up and left the seat. So in this instance, in this koan, the world-honoured one didn't get to give a talk. He got up, he sat down, and before he'd had a chance to say a single word, Manjushri struck the gavel to say the talk is over. So in this koan, I think there's a number of things that we can look at, and one is just that everything is fine as it is already. No talks really need to be given. Nothing needs to happen. Just how it is how it is, like I was just saying before. But the piece I particularly like about this is the kind of relationship between Manjushri and the world-honoured one, that the world-honoured one had no resistance to what just happened. He had no resistance. It's like, oh, Manjushri's decided that there's not going to be anything said, that the talk itself is just arriving and then leaving. And so the world-honoured one just got up and left. And there was no problem. There was just no problem. So I like it. I like the imagery of that, of the relationship between the two of them and the acceptance of how things sometimes unfold a little unexpectedly too in life. There was no malice, there was no irritation, there was no judgment. World-honoured one just got up. And would have got up, calmly. Rearranged his robes and then left his seat. So in a lot of ways you could say this is one of the central things that we're trying to cultivate in our practice, is to feel this intimate connection with everything so that there isn't even the slightest temptation to want to think ill of someone. We can disagree with people's actions, of course, but we don't have to think ill of them. And people often have just a historical dislike of certain plants or animals. So part of our practice is to actually just not be able to help ourselves, but to feel a kind of connectedness with those animals and that plant or those plants. In the same way that we kind of generally care about our own bodies, we generally, our tendency is not to feel badly about our hands or something. We don't feel very tempted to want to hurt ourselves, generally speaking. So to have that kind of tendency towards everything, just without even trying, a leaning towards with empathy and a sense of familiarity to everyone and everything. We can do that. I think there have been people in the past, and there are people alive today, who have no ill feeling towards anyone or even to any event. They feel intimate with it all, with any circumstance. And from that place, from that seat, it's another thing I like about that koan. The world-honoured one ascended the seat. And from that seat, from that spot, then you take action. Then you're skillful from that spot of fully being intimate with everything as it is. Then you decide to act, if action is required. Because our teaching is, of course, that there is no such thing as actual badness in this world. There's no such thing as actual evil in this world. That there is purity that is masked, that has been covered and not revealed. So people can behave in terrible ways, but not because they're evil, but because their purity has been covered over. And because their purity is covered over, temporarily, they can't see the beauty in others. I like the word purity, but some people find that hard. So you could just say beauty. There's essential beauty. It gets covered over by ideas and by wounds that people get wounded in their life, and they develop ideas and opinions because of the wounds that they feel. And then they can't see the beauty in others because it's covered over in themselves. So you could say the point of our practice is to really realize this, that Buddha nature, you could say, pervades the whole universe or is the whole universe, that everybody is Buddha. Everybody is perfect in their original self. But this isn't something that we can really actualize in our own lives without kind of quite a lot of work, because there's a lot of undoing to do. There's lots of undoing to do, lots of habits to undo. So that's why we do Zazen, to help get to know our habits, and why we contemplate these teachings. And we can walk around and think about what would it be like to have no ill feeling toward anyone, and just imagine what that looks like. You know, we can contemplate that. And we can study the teachings, how the teachings sort of describe that to us. I mean, there are teachings that are very rational and logical, that go through a logical sequence to try and explain how to think about using our rational mind, how to think about teachings like Buddha nature and thusness. And we can also practice just right action in the world with our precepts. Practice just making the effort to practice trying to think in a more intimate way with others, and to try and have our actions reflect that. Even if we're not fully sure about it yet, we can kind of lean into it that way. So I made a list of different things that we can contemplate to help us feel this intimacy with everything, so that the impulse to have any negative feeling towards anyone just dissolves over time, just completely dissolves over time. So the first one is that if this is to do with sentient beings, that things that are alive, but I think we can apply it to things that are non-sentient too. We could just be nice to objects as well. It's good practice just to be nice to objects. But with sentient beings, if something's alive, it's managed to be alive. And it's managed to be alive right up to this moment. It's really good to consider that if something is alive now, and we come across it, it has managed to keep itself alive up until this point. Which means almost certainly that it wants to keep on being alive, and possibly that there are other beings around it that want it to be alive and have made an effort to keep it alive. And so it's an extraordinary thing. If it's something that breathes, right up to the moment that we come to become aware of its existence, it's been managing to breathe in and breathe out all of that time, however long it's been alive for. It's managed to keep its temperature right, in the right band. It's managed to have the right nutrition, and the right amount of moisture. It's really a very interesting thing to really contemplate. That if something is alive now, like all of us, like for years and years, we've managed to keep ourselves alive with the support of a lot of other people and a lot of other things. A lot of plants and animals have helped to keep us alive. And it can help us really feel a kind of preciousness about something, the fact that it's conscious and has some kind of sentience to it. Even a little piece of grass that's growing, there's work that's gone into it being here in this moment. So contemplating that, I think, can help us have a movement towards feeling care as our mental habit becomes to just feel care. That something is simply alive and has kept itself alive right up till now. So it doesn't matter if that person or that animal or that plant appears to be doing something that's harmful. That's not the point. That's later down the track. The first thing is to really value the fact that it wants to be alive. It doesn't want to be killed. And it wants to keep on being in its life. It wants to continue in its life. I remember as a child having a lot of feelings about people in jail and worrying about them. I don't know why that happened, but I had such a feeling about that as a child, because nobody in my family up until that point had ever been incarcerated, but I had very strong feelings about, are they being looked after? Are they getting enough water? Are they getting enough sandwiches? Are they warm enough? I used to worry about that quite a lot as a child. And now, as probably everybody here knows, I now have one of my own children incarcerated. So I have a very specific person that I have to wonder about such things, check on and try to advocate for. So we can apply that to just, insects and snakes and any creature that we come across. And so it's not saying that we may not, in some instance, take a life. We may do that, but we can do that still without disregard. We don't have to have malice, we don't have to have hatred, but we also don't have to have indifference. We can, with awareness and a little bit of sorrow, if we need to, maybe sometimes it's too hard to gently sweep all the ants away if you've got a lot of ants in your house. Sometimes it's just too hard to do that for people. For some people it's not too hard, they just spend really a long time carefully sweeping all the ants away. And some people maybe not. But you can still, if you decide that I just need to wipe the bench, you can do it with a sense of intimacy, with no disregard, just making a humble choice based on what you're capable of. So that's one contemplation, that if something is alive, it's kept itself alive, and other beings have kept it alive right up till now, so it's very precious. As our first thought is of their preciousness. And then I think another way to help us not feel ill feelings is the teachings of cause and effect, that particularly for humans, that all the things, it applies to everything of course, but in this conversation, that if a person is doing something that we are tempted to really dislike them for, we can just contemplate how they got to be where they are in their life. If they're a cranky person or a judgmental person, angry person, or just an annoying person in some way, whatever it might be that we find annoying. All the causes and conditions of their life have brought them to being that way. That's another thing that we can contemplate. And that if we'd had the same situation, we might have the same tendency. Maybe as an example, sometimes we come across people who just talk a great deal and want to be listened to a great deal. No matter how much you listen to them, they still want to keep talking. You come across that. And so we can think, why would that be? Like genuinely, why would that be? Why would someone need to keep talking and keep talking and keep talking? Why would that be? It's not very hard to come up with a theory. We're all creative enough that we can come up with a theory. And as long as our theory isn't patronising, as long as it's really like, well, it may well be that they didn't get listened to very well. It's probably something along those lines. Or sometimes when people have had something extremely intense happen that they can't assimilate, they talk about that thing over and over and over. If people have had a really difficult trauma and they haven't been able to find a way to kind of integrate it, they talk about it over and over, or something similar to it over and over and over. So we can, contemplate that. The causes and conditions, we are all who we are because of all of that unbelievably complex, unable to be unravelled web of causes and conditions. And I think another thing that we can contemplate to help us not feel ill will towards others is this common experience we have of suffering. Anything that is sentient, that has any capacity to feel, does feel unpleasantness in its life. There's no getting around it. And experiences wonderful things too. It's not a depressing thought that everybody suffers. There's nothing depressing about it. It's just the suchness of things. It's just the way of things. It's not even actually necessarily a bad. It can be a very fruitful thing to suffer. You can learn a lot from it. It can give us energy and drive us. We talked about that a bit last week, actually. That came up last week. But just in general, just to be aware that everybody is suffering. Everybody suffers. So no matter how much someone is causing suffering to others, they are definitely suffering too. There's no way you can be a happy person that goes around harming others. It's just not possible. You have to be deeply unhappy in a certain way or trapped in some way. A lot of people who do harm are trapped in their lives in a certain way. You can think about that with soldiers, for example. People forget that when you become a soldier, you can't just say, oops, I've changed my mind. I'm going to go home now. You can't. So sometimes, people end up going to war and they don't like it, but they can't get out of it. And they're suffering. They maybe had an idea that what they're doing was going to be really the right thing, and then when they get there, they think, oh, maybe not. I don't know if this is the right thing. But they don't have much choice. So people suffer even when we watch them doing harm. They are suffering too. I think a really good example that most people see a little bit occasionally is like if you see a parent with a child in the supermarket or somewhere and the child is really misbehaving and then the parent is like overly harsh, maybe hits the child quite hard or speaks really poorly to the child. It's easy to feel empathy for the child. It's so easy. Nearly anybody can do that. But can we also just naturally, without effort, feel ourself in that parent? Can we feel just how hard it must be to be that parent? And we can do that with our practice. We don't even have to try after a while. We'll just do that. Empathy will be all across the board. All the different, the child, the parent who's being harsh on the child, then maybe someone who's observing, being judgmental of the parent. We can feel empathy for them as well. Like every single, there's like nobody gets excluded from our ability to just, without even trying, lean in and feel connected to them. Because we see the suffering, because we see what's driving them. Like everybody is trying not to suffer, mostly. That's what we're trying not to. But the way that we try not to suffer often causes us and other people more suffering. But if you look very closely, what's driving people's behaviour is actually their attempts to not suffer. They're just going about it in a way that's creating more suffering. So we can just contemplate this common experience of suffering that we all have, of confusion that we all have, and that we all make mistakes, and contemplate that we all make mistakes. Which is kind of the last thing I was thinking about, is that we all have mistaken views. Like everybody has mistaken views. We can contemplate that we have mistaken views, and so does everybody else. And that we're all kind of muddling along as best as we can. You know, some of us doing a better job than others. I remember hearing Mother Teresa saying a long time ago that everybody is Jesus in disguise. And I just love that. Everybody is Jesus in disguise. So from a Buddhist perspective, we would say Buddha nature doesn't always look lovely. Buddha nature doesn't always look lovely. It's often in disguise. But that's our practice. Our practice is quite exacting, actually. It's very demanding of us in a certain way. If you really want to practice well, there's no exceptions to Buddha nature. There's no exceptions. It's easy to be loving and caring to just a certain percentage of people or animals or plants or events. That's not hard. Everybody does that. Everybody does that. It's much harder to make it all-inclusive. But that is our way. Our way is all-inclusive. It really is. So we need to contemplate these teachings a lot so that it just becomes our nature to be all-inclusive. There's another koan that I like that's in part of one of Dogen's fascicles, the Genjo koan, the translation here in Moon in a Dewdrop. So this is, Dogen has included this koan in his writing here. Zen master Baochi of Mount Mayu was fanning himself. A monk approached and said, "Master, the nature of wind is permanent and there is no place it does not reach. Why then do you fan yourself?" "Although you understand that the nature of wind is permanent," Baochi replied, "you do not understand the meaning of it reaching everywhere." "What is the meaning of it reaching everywhere?" asked the monk again. The master just kept fanning himself. The monk bowed deeply. So the monk sort of challenges the teacher, you could say, saying the nature of wind is everywhere. Like, why do you bother to fan yourself? So what I like about this too is the simplicity of just fanning oneself. We don't need to think about things as being incredibly grand. Say Buddha nature pervades the whole universe. Instead of getting caught up in thinking how grand and magnificent that is, it's just totally ordinary. It's just the little torn edges, the folded up edges of the book. It's just us getting in our cars and driving to the temple. It's just the master fanning himself. The wind doesn't have to be blowing across the top of Mount Everest. It could just be fanning. So this is a way of expressing Buddha Dharma. That's the way it's here. And Buddha Dharma, we can say Buddha nature or true nature or big mind. So it's just our ordinary life and the ordinary things that are happening in our life. And when those ordinary things that happen aren't always exactly the way we want, that's where we practice this all-inclusive intimacy with things. So just simple things like a noisy meeting. We don't have to leap towards trying to feel compassionate to something extremely terrible, although that is also good. The practice is usually just not feeling aversion to just very ordinary things. The neighbour next door who maybe puts their, in Australia we call it a wheelie bin, in America a trash can, the way they put it on out on the pavement might just get in the way with the way we park our car or something like that. Just very tiny things like that. So it's like the wind that comes from fanning oneself, just these ordinary little things. This is where our practice really is very powerful. It's in all those little tiny moments. And another koan out of the hidden lamp. Ling Zhao's helping. One day, layman Pang and his daughter Ling Zhao were out selling bamboo baskets. Coming down off a bridge, the layman stumbled and fell. When Ling Zhao saw this, she ran to her father's side and threw herself to the ground. "What are you doing?" cried the layman. "I saw you fall, so I'm helping," replied Ling Zhao. Luckily no one was looking, remarked the layman. It's kind of an unusual way to help. If someone falls down and then you throw yourself down on the ground next to them. But what's really nice about that image is a sense of sameness. One person falls over and you go and fall down next to them. Because sometimes we can have the mistaken tendency to be helpful in a way that's patronizing. We help someone, but we feel superior in our helping, and that's not our way. Our way is a way of equality. If we help, we're helping from a sense of sameness with that person that we're helping or that being that we're helping, not superior to it. We don't help something like, say, a little kitten or a baby duckling. We don't help it and think, "I am so amazing the way I help things. Aren't I great the way I help things?" We don't do that. We just feel ourselves as no different to that little duckling or that little kitten. And so we're just helping that way. So Ling Zhao just throws herself down next to her father. I really like that image. And I'll read a little bit. There's a comment here by Joan Sutherland, reflects on this koan. I'll read a few paragraphs. The Pang family has been the embodiment of enlightened householder life in China since the 8th century, living modestly, deeply committed to the way and each other, full of humour and insight, unabashedly eccentric. During their lifetimes, a revolution in Chan was underway, An awakening was now understood as something that happens in relationship, in encounters and conversations. The earliest koans are records of such encounters, and ones involving the pangs show the deep realization is just as possible in domesticity as in monastic life, for women as for men. Layman Pang renounced his wealth to live simply, befriending some of the greatest Chan teachers of his day. Mrs. Pang seemed to have been simultaneously no-nonsense and profoundly connected to the mysterious. And their son, we know little except that he worked in the fields, growing the family's food. For many, the most luminous member of the family is the daughter, Ling Jiao, whose name means spirit shining. Ling Jiao and her father were inseparable, supporting the family by making and selling bamboo utensils. Later, she accompanied him on his pilgrimages. Once, when the layman tripped, Ling Jiao threw herself to the ground next to him. She explained herself with the immortal words, "I saw you fall, so I'm helping." Ling Jiao's action obliterates the idea that there is a helper and a helped. Compassion isn't a commodity we deliver, but a commitment, according to Chan, to help liberate the intimacy already inherent in any situation. There's another little bit here. Ling Jiao's gesture suggests that we are all falling together, lifetime after lifetime, through the universe. Right now we are falling through this world, which holds out an invitation to us. Come see what life is like here. Yeah. So that's what I think would be good for us to imagine, that is possible for us to have no ill feeling toward anyone. And all of this space gets created when we have no ill feeling. And not only a whole lot of space, we actually feel this connectedness. We've got everything to feel connected to, not just some things to be connected to. We can feel connected to everything. So I'm going to see, at the moment I can't see anybody on the screen, so I'm going to see if I can change that so I can see gallery view. There we go. We have Jack and Yi with us online. And do you mind if I just say our names? So we have Mark and Bill and Fiona and Liz, Tony, Brendan, Nick, and myself, Neti. Would anyone like to ask a question or share some thoughts about this idea? Bill?
Yeah, I really liked that story about the Pang family. Have you come across anything else about them?
Yes, there's lots and lots of material about them. I'll point you in the direction.
The story, I don't know if this just complicates it, but I thought there was another way of taking it as well, that the father trips and falls, and the daughter, rather than immediately assuming that it was an accident, goes, "Oh, I'll help him do that," and joins in. I don't know, what do you think of that?
Well, I like the idea of not assuming anything. That's kind of nice. Yeah. Jack?
Maybe he was about to start breakdancing or something, you know?
Well, you don't know.
I'm helping you breakdance, Dad. Okay? Your breakdancing is just not very good. You only get to the ground and then it stops. But it's really nice, Neti, to be, reminded of that sense of the possibility of living free from ill will. Yeah. And that there aren't any villains.
Yeah,
because except in my life, there are definitely villains.
well, I mean, that's
We
what
all think that, right?
That's right. That's what most people, or many people, think. Yes, but
Oh, but you haven't met my
Yes.
ex-husband, or you haven't met my stepbrother, or whatever. You know,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely a villain. You know, yeah. So lovely. Thanks so much for the talk. I've got another Zoom meeting now, so I've got to go. But just thank you so much, Neti, and hello to everyone, and bye.
Yes, Fiona.
Yeah, I'm thinking there's this very problematic person in my community garden community, and I'm thinking I can probably, when I have contact with that person, practice that, try and practice that. But I think this is an instance where it does need a firm boundary, and so I'm not going to go towards him, or
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And this teaching isn't. We're not talking about what action you take or don't take at this point. This is like the moments beforehand. The moments beforehand, like setting boundaries might be absolutely the right thing to do with someone. But this is about that very first moment. What do we do before we decide how to act? That's what we're really examining here, because if we get that bit right, then the actions that follow are going to be more wholesome. They kind of take care of themselves. If we get that first bit right, the rest kind of starts to follow. Still might take some, practicing, but say with that person, if you can on some sort of immediate level feel a connectedness to them, like know that they've managed to keep on breathing and keeping themselves alive right up to this point, that they too, have hardships in their life, that they have mistaken views, just like we all do, kind of thing. If you can kind of hold that, then even if you say, I actually don't want to have anything to do with that person, you can do that with no ill feeling towards them. It's just on a practical level. The right thing to do is not to have anything to do with that person. But you can do it with you don't have to dislike them in any way. You can it's just a bad idea. Just like that. It can be kind of very practical and very neutral in that sense. Just better for me not to. No ill feeling. And it frees up a huge amount of space in our minds when we do that. Yeah, so thank you for mentioning that. Mark?
Just an example of getting it wrong. And yesterday, there's a patient recovering after some surgery, and she was crying and screaming and just really disturbing the whole of the theatre suite. And I was on edge with this sound. It was, stop it, it's really annoying me. And then one of the recovery nurses explained that she's actually drug user, having a psychotic episode. There's all this background, and you think,
right,
wow, why did I think like that?
Yeah.
Just illustrating what you're saying.
Yes, that's right. Great example of the causes and conditions of that person's life. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Tony.
There's an expression that I think Ajahn Chah said, that if you know one mango tree, you know them all. And I think that's happened in my life with Buddhist practice as I've become more aware of myself. You develop humility and you see the things that other people do, you see a little bit in yourself. You know that you've done that, or you can understand things a bit better and stuff like that. So that's something that I've sort of noticed over my practice and over my life, sort of thing.
Yeah. I like that. If you know one mango tree, you know them all. Is that, or one mango?
One mango tree, you know them all.
Yeah, that's good.
It's very Thai, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of sometimes I've heard interviews with actors, and they say no matter whatever character they're playing, they can always find some aspect of that character in themselves, even if their personality is generally very different. That all of us have this capacity to be this. All, like, if there's anything a human can do, all of us have that capacity to do that. We probably won't, but it doesn't mean we don't have that capacity under certain circumstances, and to really know that helps us to not be so quick to judgment, like you say, to have humility. All right, I think maybe we'll finish up, and so we'll just do this last bit of chanting, and then we'll do 3 bows together.